Perfect. Here is our empty, completely empty learning continuum, and let's start to fill it in. Here's our content, numerical proportional reasoning, curricular competency, model mathematics in contextualized experiences. Now we can put those together to make a target. I can model proportional reasoning in contextualized experiences. And what does that mean again? Well, this means that I can identify and construct a context where proportional reasoning can be modeled. I can demonstrate how proportional reasoning is modeled in the identified context, and I can calculate it with accuracy. Notice I bolded the verbs. Verbs and nouns are so important here. Verbs are explaining what the students are doing and where in Bloom's taxonomy it lies. And nouns are usually things that you can replace with your content. Any nouns that refer to mathematics, in this context, we are talking about proportional reasoning. Now we're going to continue with our backwards design and move to the left, okay, if you looked at that larger continuum, and we're going to start to fill in the section called exploring the goal. So clarifying proficiency is what do my students need to accomplish to show that they're proficient? Exploring the goal is as students are working on this competency, they may be exploring these skills and this knowledge. So before they can model it, and before they can identify or demonstrate or calculate, what do they need to do? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to think, I know the continuum goes like this, but if you go to the appendix, you'll see something called a learning ladder. It's not for this unit, but if we start to think of it as a ladder, we need to start to think of our proficiency as the top rung or the goal rung, and because we can go further with extension, but all of the rungs below it, that is what we're building here, okay? So what we're going to start to do is we're going to start to look at each piece of success criteria, and we're going to say, well, what does a student need to be able to do before they can do that, okay? We do this by using, you guessed it, Bloom's taxonomy. Let's move and take a look at Bloom. Here is Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's builds on itself. So before you can apply, you have to comprehend. You can't use proportions in a new situation without previously knowing what it is. So we're going to start to look for verbs in the comprehension section. And then we are going to create I can statements that are building block lessons or rungs in the ladder that will take us towards proficiency. Here is what, well, let me go to the next section and I'll show you. But this PDF is extremely useful for building continuums. I couldn't do it without it. Here it is completed, but let me talk you through what it is that we're trying to understand. So for example, I expect a student to be able to identify and construct a context where proportional reasoning can be modeled. If they're supposed to identify it, like, oh, there is a model that I could create, or that's not content neutral, but there is a context where I could use proportions. Well, before they do that, they need to comprehend the contexts and where rates, ratios, and proportions could be modeled. I understand where I could use it, and I could see a new one. Okay, so first this, then that. Secondly, if a successful student is supposed to demonstrate proportional reasoning being modeled, they're going to need to explain the connection between ratios, rates, and proportions. They're going to need to understand or explain, like, hey, I see how this works. Now let me demonstrate to you how it works in the context I found. And then the last thing is that if I'm supposed to be able to calculate it in the context I've identified, I should probably have practice calculating it in other contexts previous, such that I can do it in a new transformed way. Okay? So I look at each piece of success criteria and I say, okay, what is the comprehension that is necessary to understand these ones? And those are my building blocks. And what I'm starting to do is eventually, like I said, this is like a unit plan. I'll begin to teach a lesson on the connection between ratios, rates, and proportions. I will begin to teach a lesson on contexts where they're modeled. I'll begin to teach a lesson on calculating them accurately. Each one of these I cans, like you have a learning goal with each lesson, these become my unit plan. Okay, today we're going to do this. Now we're going to do this, all in the hopes of making it to this final destination goal. Now let's begin to look at building readiness, which is the section of even more backwards design before exploring the goal. You'll notice that clarifying proficiency is a bit cut off with my video, but I trust that you have my notes and handouts, that if you do need to read this portion, you have it there. So we know what they need to do to explore the goal, but to begin making connections, what do they need to explore? So this section is often best exploring the goal is like, well, to do this piece of success criteria, I must first do this. To do this, I must first do this. Exploring the goal is to do this, I must first know this. So this section is often best framed in questions or sometimes I know statements. This is the bottom end of Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge. So you could use I know statements or what statements. So let me show you. And what and know are noun questions. So I can, that's a verb, that's doing. I know is content. This is the right section of your curriculum. So I can start to use, if I was at comprehension, I'm going to start to look at knowledge, hence why I'm saying I know. So if I'm meant to comprehend where ratios, rates, and proportions are modeled, I have to know what is a ratio, what is a rate, what is a proportion, and in what context are rates, ratios, and proportions used. Those are my springboard questions. That's how I get started. It's building a foundation for my students to then jump in or dive in. I might teach a lesson. Like I said, each one is almost like a lesson. I might teach a lesson on what is a ratio. I might teach a lesson on what is a rate. I might teach a lesson on what is a proportion. I might teach a lesson on context where they're used. I might have practice time or rich tasks where students need to comprehend those contexts, or a rich task where they can explain the connection between them, and then constant use of calculation so that they have all what they need to then get to our final destination goal. I really think, and hence the learning ladders, which the learning ladders are in the appendix. They were created by a BC teacher named Jen Morose. Hence why learning ladders or ladders are, or steps are such a fantastic metaphor for learning. Learning builds on itself, it scaffolds on itself, and it only works the best, or it works the best when we clarify our goal ahead of time. This is why I haven't given you how to mark a test without percentages yet. We have to clarify our goal ahead of time. Let's take a look at a completed learning object or learning continuum, because we have this is a mostly completed learning continuum. This is a completed learning continuum. You'll notice the first three columns are filled in, and we have done those before. I've also filled in the final column, enriching understanding, but I'm devoting an entire session to unpacking what that means. So you could peruse that if you'd like, but we're gonna look at a whole session on extension and enrichment, because percentages actually hold back extension and enrichment. Now, teachers are well aware of the directions that they're going and all the steps that they need when you have something like this. And the targets and criteria are well outlined. The questions are well outlined. So, for example, like I said, the term unit of study, some people think is outdated, but this could be your unit of study. And then at the end of it, when you need an assessment, it's one final learning goal, modeling proportions. Okay. All of the other learning goals are building blocks. And those are places where you can start to see, well, maybe we didn't get to the final learning goal because we didn't comprehend the context where we can model proportions, or you didn't understand how a proportional model can show you that proportions are at work, or you never were able to explain the connection and that hindered your ability to do our final goal. But here we have basically our final unit. Let's wrap it up with in sum. And I know there's so much curricular jargon. Stay with me. The next sessions are really going to wrap it up. Hopefully it's going to be like a book with a crazy middle and a great ending. But in sum, objectives framework. Teachers need to know the direction they're going in and the direction they're heading with their students. Clarifying a clear learning goal is the solution to wandering aimlessly. Thank you, Katie White, for sharing us that wisdom. And Bloom's taxonomy helps teachers categorize the type of target that they're aiming for. And I should add, and also classify what students need to know before they aim for that target. Learning targets, success criteria, and clarifying proficiency. Teachers can put content and competencies together to create a learning target. Learning targets are curricular I can statements. Learning targets must always be defined. Please, if there's only one thing you take from this session, that's what it must be. I can must always be followed by this means that. That helps a lot of people, teachers, parents, students. Success criteria are the this means that statements. Their verbs often come from the same category of Bloom's taxonomy as the set target. These are the criteria that let teachers know if a student has reached proficiency. So, can they model proportions? Well, could they identify it? Could they construct it? Could they demonstrate it? Could they calculate it? Then yes, they've got this. If they're missing one of those things, not quite understanding yet. Exploring the learning goal. Before a student is proficient, teachers must explore the learning goal. What targets must a student accomplish before they're proficient? In order to complete the target, what steps must the student take? Targets for exploring the goal come from previous categories of Bloom's taxonomy. Building readiness. Before a student can explore the learning goal, they need a foundational knowledge to springboard into learning. The building readiness section asks simple knowledge questions for teachers to guide students towards the learning goal. In a learning continuum document, this section is often best phrased in questions. Now that a learning continuum is nearly complete, a teacher can begin to plan their lessons. Each lesson will address a different question, target, or piece of criteria as the unit approaches what it means to be proficient. Let me add here that this is heavily relying on the work of Katie White. Katie White's 2017 book, Softening the Edges, is a fantastic read and an even deeper dive on how you can do this, not just for mathematics, but for other subjects as well. I find her work to be profound, and I hope that you have started to glean and learn from this as well. But I also understand that there might be a lot of dissonance. So if you don't feel like you want to pick up that book, or the things that I've been teaching you don't make sense, let's take a look at some of these moving forward questions. I'd like to empathize with you. So you might be thinking a lot of things. So here's some questions you might feel if we're moving forward. Moving forward, what about that final section called Enriching Understanding? We're getting to that. The whole next section is on enriching understanding. How can I find this document helpful if it uses all this edu jargon, like contextualized experiences? I relate, and the edu jargon's not helpful. I will say it's sometimes not helpful. The content neutrality. It will be helpful if you need to transfer it or use the skill again, but we are going to move towards student-friendly language, and student-friendly language is often teacher and parent-friendly language too. Next session, stay tuned. How can I teach a successful unit of study with only one learning goal? You'd be surprised. Please give it a try. Not all goals are made equal, right? So like the fractions test, it had application and comprehension. If you set one good goal, and maybe comprehension is your goal and application is an extension for students who can go on and do more, then you can really realize what students can do. If you set too many goals, it's really difficult to know. Hence why 15 out of 24 was not a reflective statement of what a student could do. Remind me why this is better than percentages. Why haven't you been talking about assessment? Like I said, you have to trust me. We're on that roller coaster. It might be slow at this point because we haven't dove into assessment. It's a lot of curriculum design. Please, we have to adjust curriculum design before assessment changes will make sense. Otherwise, we're in ideal fluffy land. Okay, you have to trust me with that. And then the last thing, I'm not sure how this document is valuable to me as a teacher. Hopefully, when you see the student learning map in the next sessions, it will be helpful, and you'll see how enriching understanding is helpful. But hopefully, you'll start to see that this might be a replacement for your current unit plan. But this is the direction that we're going. So please stay tuned for the next session. Your turn. As always, please make sure that you check out the handout where you'll find questions for reflection, discussion, and enrichment. Reflection for checking out your own practice, for discussion, for diving into this exact topic with your peers and your colleagues, and for enrichment, for those of you that feel like you've got this and you want to move forward, there is a question for you. And suggested reading. I've mentioned this already, but the bottom one, the work of Katie White. a lot of what I've been doing is heavily relying on her understanding of curriculum design and assessment. Thank you for being with me for this two-part second session. I will join you again for the third session on enriching understanding and extension. Thank you.